Would you please pray with me? Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. One of my favorite analogies to talk about baptism is the analogy of adoption. Paul in the New Testament likes to use that analogy a lot. I don't think there's anyone in my family that was adopted, but I know a number of folks here in our congregation have experienced adoption, being adopted parents. You know that well. My first real close experience with adoption ever was when I was in seminary. And I had a close friend there that he and his wife adopted a little baby from Africa. And I was so struck. They wound up making 2 trips to Africa. The first was to go and have an initial visit with the baby that they'd be baptized, or that they would be adopting. And so they went to Africa, and they came back, and they said, "Oh my goodness, when we saw our baby, we fell in love with her. Our hearts melted. It was in a way that they couldn't even describe. Just instantly, they were attached to this little baby girl that they knew they would love forever." And then they went back a couple weeks later to go sign all the adoption paperwork and bring their new little baby home. And I always was so struck by the reality. I mean, it's not really that shocking, but it was their contact. It was seeing this little baby that their heart broke and they fell in love with her. It wasn't signing the paperwork. That came later, a couple weeks later, another visit back to Africa later. But the paperwork is real important because if they didn't have the paperwork, the baby, in many ways, it's sort of bad words, wouldn't belong to them. But the paperwork had nothing to do with their love for the baby. I think baptism is a lot like that analogy. Little Mackenzie has been loved by God for a long time. I would even dare say, well, to use the language from I had to write down the 139th Psalm, God says that God knows us, and I think loves us, even in our mother's womb. So today was not a day of God saying, "Oh, now I love you, little Mackenzie," because honestly, how could you look at this baby and not be like, "Oh," right? Have you had that experience, Craig, at all? Maybe? No? I know no one in your family has had that experience with her. But today, in many ways, is like the paper signing day for God. Today, it becomes official. Today, she officially belongs to God. Not just you, not just all of you, but now, in many ways, she belongs to me, to you all beyond this inner circle. Now she's ours. She's part of our family. And being part of families is complicated stuff, right? In the family that I grew up in, we had these things that I did not like at all called rules. Familiar with these in families? Do you have rules in your families? I've heard some stories about rules in this family. I remember a story I heard, I think, from this family about breaking rules and doing math problems for a long time after that. When I broke rules at my house growing up, I wish I had math problems to do. I experienced the rules to be much more, we'll say much less enjoyable than math problems, and I like math problems. Has this been your story in your families too? Are there expectations? Are there rules? Are there consequences when the rules don't go right? In our house right now, my kids aren't here in the room. I don't think they're all gone, right? So I can say all kinds of stories about the rules in our house. There are lots of rules about how we talk to people, our physical contact with each other, as far as we don't hit each other. And sometimes, this might shock you, our kids break those rules. And there are consequences for breaking those rules. On my Kindle, I can make them not be able to use their Kindle. When you say, "I'm pausing your Kindle from all internet," the reaction is strong. In families, there are expectations, and it is good that there are expectations, because the expectations allow us to know what it is that those we love expect out of us, and so we can live into those expectations. Again, I think this is exactly the way it is with God and in God's family. Jesus overwhelmingly tells story after story about what it is to be part of God's family, what's expected out of us as we live among God's faithful people. I don't know if you caught that, but when I gave the long list of expectations for Craig and Brooke, and for all of us, the first one was to live amongst the rest of these knuckleheads. That was my language on Wednesday night when I met with them. The first expectation for little Mackenzie is now she's with all of us, in all the struggle of us and all the awesomeness of us. Jesus talks at length about what it means to be part of God's family. Most overwhelming, he says that to be part of God's family is to be people of love. Love that, as Paul says later in the New Testament, love that's patient and kind, not envious or boastful of your own way, but sacrificial and caring for the other. This is the way we see Jesus live out his love for those who are in relationship with him. Ultimately, he dies on behalf of them. And so, on one hand, little Mackenzie is walking into this relationship with all the rest of us with lots of expectation upon herself, not just the expectation of your family and of this family, but there's also the incredible giftedness that comes with family. As those promises were made, I really built it up for Craig and Brooke on Wednesday. I said, this is all the stuff you have to do for her. But then I said, listen to the progression. Then it's about, will you, sponsors, be there for her and with her in this journey? And then I asked, I wish there was a next layer there for family, because especially when there's a big, awesome family like you all, to say that, yes, we are with her because truly that is your role. But then the last step of that is to say, people of God, will all of you promise to care for her? And that's why I yell at you to be bold in that moment, because truly we are. And so, Craig and Brooke was so mad that she left already, but you can tell her later. Little Mackenzie, this group of people behind you, whether it's your dad and your mom, your sponsors, your family, or this church community, and this church community just represents the fullness of God's people across the world. We stand here, or sit, many of us, in this moment to care for you and to care for each other. Amen.